I want to talk about these record-breaking casualty losses that the Russians are taking. As of a few days ago, and this isn't the headline, but I feel like they should have led with the headline, the Russians broke a casualty record of over 1,700 casualties in a single day, as both an offensive in the Donetsk region and on Robatny are underway, but also a new offensive in the Kharkiv Oblast, trying to open up a new front in the war, is also underway, with the Russians heavily relying on infantry assaults in order to take the land that they're taking, which come with high casualties for the assaulting infantry. But this is also happening, these records are getting broken at the same time that the Russian defense minister, well, now former Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, is getting demoted and replaced by a Russian economist who used to be the finance minister for the Kremlin between 2011 and 2012, if I remember correctly. Sorry, I forgot the finance minister order in Russia. I can't remember everything. Russia's new defense minister, Andrei Belousov, said on May 14th that his main priority is to win the war in Ukraine, and get this, in the context of them just breaking record losses, with minimal human losses, even as Moscow reportedly suffers record number of troops killed and wounded on the battlefield. Busalov, a former aide and Russian economy minister from 2012 to 2013, I was wrong. I said 2011 to 2012. I was off by a year. I hope you all in chat can forgive me. I appreciate it if you will. Replaced Sergei Shoigu as the defense minister in a surprise reshuffle of the Russian security and defense apparatus. Speaking on May 14th, after being officially appointed, he laid out his priorities for his new role. The key task, of course, remains achieving victory, ensuring the achievement of the military political goals of the special military operation set by President Putin. At the same time, I want to specifically emphasize this, with minimal human losses. Russia has not disclosed the losses of its armed forces in Ukraine since September of 2022, meaning the official Kremlin death toll still stands at just 5,937. Ukraine publishes daily figures that are generally in line with estimates from Western nations. The latest count on May 15th is 486,940 Russian troops lost, though the numbers from the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces do not specify killed or wounded. Earlier this month, France estimated 150,000 Russian troops had been killed since the launch of the full-scale invasion, and put the total losses, including injuries, at 500,000. Now, these Ukrainian numbers, I'm not going to comment on the French numbers. Take the French numbers as they are. If you believe the French, you believe the French. If you don't believe the French, you don't believe the French. But as for the Ukrainian numbers do have some basis in reality. They are not totally contrived as propaganda as many people will suggest. They do ebb and flow according to the real actual numbers that the Ukrainians take. Now, that doesn't mean that the numbers that the Ukrainian government publishes are the real numbers of the losses 100% confirmed. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that when the number goes up, the real casualties go up. When the number goes down, the real casualties go down. And this can be tracked through visually confirmed losses. What visually confirmed losses is something where an offset nerd on the internet, usually overweight, sweaty, balding, but still getting all the women, because offset is just, it makes women tremendously wet. If you just talk to them about satellite imagery, they love it. Try it. Recommendation from me. They will go out and they will track the visual losses, meaning they'll find vehicles that have been destroyed in footage posted by the different military groups. They'll show satellite photos. They'll look at photos of the landscape near the front line. They'll try to find burnt out husks of vehicles and try to check for other photos to see if it has been recorded yet as a confirmed loss. And when there's more visually confirmed losses because of a massive failed Russian assault, the casualty numbers on the Ukrainian side that they're officially listing goes up with those losses and goes down with those losses. Now, that doesn't mean that it's 1-to-1, where you have one visually confirmed loss, you have one person added to the Ukrainian list. The Ukrainian number is higher. Now, some people will say, well, that's because they're making some up, but that I don't think is necessarily fair. And the reason being is that you can't record every loss. you can't record every loss because the cameras aren't always rolling when a Russian soldier gets shot. You know, the camera's not going to always be rolling under every single artillery bombardment. If an artillery team has to shoot and scoot, and they're going to be in an operating position for maybe 3 minutes before they get out of there, because the Russians are going to hit the position, because they're looking for teams that are shooting and scooting, both with Lancet drones and with their own radar systems that measures ground vibrations to try to figure out where the artillery bombardment's coming from. They don't have time to take out their phone and record that often. Sometimes they will, but a lot of times they won't. And on top of that, let's say that you lose a bunch of Russian soldiers get killed in an assault, but it's in an area where the footage you took shows too much information. It would suggest, if posted, where your military unit is, and then the Russians could use it to bomb you, kill you, and then that footage is a security risk. For these reasons, plus more, not every single loss is recorded and shown online. And certainly, not a lot of losses their own side will take will be posted, because who wants to post endless pieces of footage of your own side taking losses? So I do think that on top of the losses that we are visually confirming, which is one of the more ironclad ways to try to track these losses. It isn't perfect. Sometimes one loss that's like a burnt out husk gets recorded as a Ukrainian loss when it's a Russian loss, or a Russian loss when it's a Ukrainian loss. You know, a lot of these people are doing this work, this OSCENT tracking, in their free time, so it isn't perfect, but it's a good base. It's a good bottom of the estimation. So I would say that the visually confirmed losses should be used to be the bare minimum losses for either side. It should be the starting point when you're trying to figure out how many casualties either side has probably suffered. But it doesn't show everything. And so while the Ukrainian numbers don't match up perfectly with the visually confirmed numbers, that could have a good reason. Does that mean that every number that they say is true? No, not necessarily. It's definitely easy for me to picture a situation where the Ukrainians count a person that they think they blew up, and they're like unsure about it, so they just count it as a loss. I mean, other armies have done that before. It's not hard for me to imagine the Ukrainian army doing that before. And, of course, there's nothing stopping me from also bringing up the fact that maybe it could just be propaganda, that they just added 100 to add 100. Again, though, the numbers do ebb and flow with real casualties, so I will point towards that as evidence against that, but even if it ebbs and flow, they could still throw a few numbers in there. So we don't know for sure that the Ukrainian numbers are accurate, but we do know that the numbers ebb and flow with real casualties. And on top of that, as we just said earlier, the French are also projecting 500,000 Russian losses, and the British are not that far behind either in the last losses I saw they published a few months ago. But none of this is the main story that I wanted to talk about. This casualty number is important. These statistics are insane. I mean, could you imagine the United States reporting these type of casualty numbers? The United States has lost over 100,000 soldiers since the end of World War II. The Russians in the last 2 years have lost more soldiers in Ukraine than the United States has lost in every war it has ever fought since the end of the Second World War. And it's not even close. If either Russian, French, or British numbers are to be believed. Not even close. But none of this is the main story I wanted to talk about tonight. Those numbers obviously wouldn't be accepted by any Western military, but I wanted to talk about specifically this number right here. According to Ukraine's figures, Moscow lost the most number of soldiers in a single day since the start of the full-scale invasion on May 12th. 1,740 soldiers. Let me say that number again. 1,740 soldiers. On May 10th, the number was 1,320. May 11th, 1,260. May 13th, 1,400. And May 14th, 1,510. Also, for the Ukrainians put in perspective the French numbers by putting here, France's 150,000 figure of Russian troops killed is around 10 times higher than that suffered by the Soviet army during its decade-long war in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. Reminder that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan didn't just include Russians, by the way. It included Ukrainians, Kazakhs, Poles, people from all across the Soviet Union. Something to be remembered when that number is also taken into consideration, that the burden of the casualties wasn't just placed on the Russians either. In fact, many would point towards the idea that the Russians died at disproportionately lower rates than other groups in the Soviet Union. But 1,740 casualties in a single day. Dead soldiers? No, casualties. Casualties mean either dead or wounded. So that could mean either, of course, a soldier got shot and killed, or it could mean a soldier blew off a leg, blew off an arm, or I know in the British statistics, they included people who were injured and returned back to service. It could be just small flesh wounds. So we're just talking about casualties in their total. So Russian casualties in their total. To me, this shows that this war, while it has not been in the headlines as much as it has been before, is still breaking records in the amount of violence that it can do upon Europe. 1,740 casualties. That is like 70% of what America suffered in the war in Afghanistan for its entirety. I think we suffered over 2,000 casualties in Afghanistan. 1,740 in one day. In 2 days, they cleared us. They went straight past us on the amount of casualties we suffered in Afghanistan over 20 years. In one day, they almost cleared all of it. That's the type of casualties that the Russians are taking. That's the type of casualties that they're taking. This is the type of casualties that produce so much generational trauma. This is the type of casualties that worsen a demographic crisis in horrific ways that economic planners only could view in the worst nightmares of their financial advisors. This is bad for the Russians. But I want to throw a few things out there. When you hear these numbers, it's kind of horrific to imagine it from our perspective, because we imagine it and how we would react to it. But on one hand, the Russians don't get freedom of the press. They don't get all this stuff being covered by the press and being displayed and openly allowed to be talked about. And on top of that, not only do they not get freedom of expression, they don't have freedom of protest. And on top of not having freedom of protest, there's also the fact that the Russian media environment is completely controlled to be pro-war. And if you're not being told how many casualties are really happening, all the voices in media are pro-war.
Cheese Wizard got a tier 2 subscription.
Hey, thank you so much for the tier 2 sub. I really appreciate that. Numbers like this can easily be disregarded as fanciful nonsense. I remember like the Bucha massacre, when the Russian state media talked about it, they denied it. They said it wasn't them, that it was really the Ukrainians. But people forget how ridiculous the denials got. They just took the footage of the massacre and then put the words fake over it. And then that was that. It was debunked. So these losses are horrific. If these losses were reported in a Western military or reported in the West, it would create one of the biggest scandals you could ever imagine. But we're not talking about the United States. We're not talking about France. We're not talking about Great Britain. We're talking about Russia, which has a controlled media environment, which has controls on freedom of expression, which has a certain amount of fear over what you can and can't express about or about foreign wars. It has all of these problems. And so these types of losses, while I do think they are going to register in Russia in the long term economically, the demographic crisis is going to get worse. The labor shortage in Russia right now is already bad. This is not even talking about all the people who have left Russia because they saw their jobs leave or because they wanted to avoid the draft. But when we're talking about the immediate future of the war, as long as that political environment can sustain itself, control the information space, control what can and can't be talked about in the political paradigm, what's in the window of available and allowable speech. If you keep that closed down, on top of making sure that the Russian public gets mobilized in a slightly kind of turned down way as in you're slowly getting rid of this loophole after this loophole after this loophole, then maybe, just maybe, the Russians are under the assumption that they can keep the political apathy that has sustained their regime so long, with their diehard supporters being the ones leading the way in front of a crowd of a largely politically apathetic public or passively supportive public, then that might be enough to irk them out something resembling a victory by the end of this war, even with these high casualties. It's basically selling Russia's future down the line to save Russia's war currently. And while these economic consequences and deaths are going to have, an impact down the line, and are still having an impact right now, well, that's being felt down the line 10 years. What about right now? And so these casualties immediately, like, you read these death numbers, and if it was the West, if it was us, if it was Canada, maybe the situation would be different. But it isn't. It's Russia. And since it's Russia, they feel like they can tank it. And whether that's true or not is a different question. But they're tanking it, and they're attempting to tank it. How Russia deals with this moving forward, going into the future, is going to be largely dependent upon what we do now. If we intensify these casualties, maybe it can get to a point that they have to pull back. But I'm of the belief that even with these numbers, the Russians feel like they can sustain this for years moving forward. At least until the Russian public is beaten out of their political apathy, which we don't have any signs of that happening in the near future.